Right and left deviation, or differences of CPI-M, with CPI and Naxalites. Introduction. To understand the differences of CPI-M, with CPI and Naxalites or right and left deviation in the communist movement in India, it is essential to delve into the history of the communist movement and its development in various phases, both during colonial India and after the attainment of political independence in 1947. The communist movement in India emerged out of and developed in close connection with the militant streams of anti-imperialist and democratic struggles of the Indian people during nearly a century. The finest elements from the anti-imperialist struggle, the emerging working class movement, peasant struggles, struggles in princely states, struggles for social reforms and fight for social transformation, at various stages joined the communist movement. The anti-imperialist struggle in India became more militant in the first decade and a half of 20THC. The working class movement, which had its beginnings in the latter part of the 19th C, was slowly spreading. There were a large number of strikes in various industries. The general strike by the Bombay textile workers, in 1908 protesting against deluxe imprisonment, was hailed by Lenin as indicating the advent of the Indian working class on the political scene. The previous century had seen innumerable peasant struggle and revolts. The peasantry began to be drawn into the liberation movement in the early years of the 20th C. As for the anti-imperialist struggle, led by the Congress, it was gradually developing from the initial stage of submitting petitions and memoranda to the stage of mass activity. In the first 2 decades of the 20THC, the Indian people were becoming dissatisfied with reformist policies of the national leaders, and sections among them began to seek more revolutionary forms of struggle for freedom. Revolutionary terrorism began to attract the youth. Some revolutionary groups went abroad to secure arms. Indians settled in Canada, USA, etc., founded the Ghadar Party in 1913 in San Francisco for mobilizing overseas Indians in anti-imperialist struggles. They gathered arms to wage armed struggle against the British and sent them to India on a ship, Komagata Maru. The British foiled this attempt. Many of these revolutionaries later became organizers of the communist movement in India. The October Revolution and its impact. The October Revolution had an electrifying effect on the Indian people. Anti-imperialist fighters, inspired by the success of the revolution and by the firm declaration by Lenin and the Bolsheviks of their unqualified support to the national liberation struggle, began to see the Russian Revolution as indicating the path for their anti-imperialist struggle. A large number of intellectuals, politicians, cultural leaders, poets, and writers hailed the Russian Revolution as the harbinger of a new period in world history. In the post-First World War period, there was an upsurge of anti-imperialist mass struggles. The British unleashed fierce and brutal repression. The Rowlatt Act of 1918 was a particularly obnoxious repressive measure. There were mighty protest movements against this act and other repressive measures. Hundreds were massacred at Jallianwala Bagh. But this brutal incident itself triggered off a mighty wave of protest actions throughout the country. Simultaneously, Muslim masses also launched a powerful mass movement known as the Caliphate movement. The first communists. The whole of India saw a sweeping mass upsurge, and the British intensified their ferocious repression. Hundreds of youths faced with this repression, fled from India and braving great peril crossed Afghanistan to reach Soviet Russia. They looked upon the latter as the only country that could firmly help their liberation struggle. The Soviet government welcomed these fighters known as muhajirs, helped them to organize and also imparted political education to them. Several of the muhajirs accepted Marxism-Leninism. The foundation of the party. Revolutionaries among the Indians in Europe and USA were also attracted to the communist movement following the success of the Russian Revolution. They established contact with the Bolshevik Party. Among them was M.N. Roy, who had gone abroad to get arms to fight the British. After staying in USA, he went to Mexico to participate in the Mexican Revolution in 1918. He became a socialist and rose to become General Secretary of the Mexican Socialist Party and later one of the leaders of the Communist Party of Mexico. He participated in the Second Congress of the Communist International and was elected a member of the Executive Committee of the CI. It was on the initiative of such individuals and groups, and particularly with the participation of Muhajirs, that the CPI was formed at Tashkent in October 17, 1920. The real moving spirit behind this was M.N. Roy, though he later belittled the importance of this event. It had 7 members: M.N. Roy and his wife Evelyn Trent Roy, Abani Mukherjee and his wife Rosa Fidengov, MPBT, Acharya, Muhammad Ali and Mohammad Shafiq. Shafiq was elected secretary of the party. 3 candidate members were recruited in December 1920, and in early 1921, many of the Muhajirs who had gone to Tashkent joined the party. Several Muhajirs attended the military school at Tashkent and later joined the University for the Toliars of the East, set up in Moscow in April 1921. They included among others Firozuddin Mansur and Kakut Usmani. The first phase, 1920 to 1933. Severe repression. Many of the founding members of the party returned to India to form communist groups in parts of the country. These pioneers had to face enormous difficulties. They were arrested and put on trial in many cases on charges of conspiring to wage war against the British. The Peshawar communist conspiracy cases of 1922–24 were the most well-known of these. Some other members of the party carried on work among the Indian immigrants abroad, publishing books, pamphlets, and journals. Within the country, no publisher was willing to print communist classics and documents. Few copies of such literature were smuggled into the country, after which handwritten copies were made and circulated. The CPGB rendered valuable fraternal help for the development of the communist movement in India, particularly in 1920s and 30s. The ideological political contribution of Rajni Pal Madut is noteworthy. The CPGB even sent their cadres as organizers in the early years of the party. Some of them, like Ben Bradley, Philip Spratt, and Lester Hutchinson, were among the accused in the Meerut conspiracy case. Inside the country, communist groups were set up in different parts of the country with the purpose of carrying on revolutionary work and popularizing Marxism. In Bombay, a group led by S.A. Dange came into being in 1922. A journal called Socialist was published in Bombay. In Calcutta, a group led by Muzaffar Ahmed emerged and published a paper called Ganavani. Kakut Usmani set up communist groups. In Banaras, Ghulam Hussain organized a group in Lahore and published a paper called Inquilab. Such groups in Punjab were formed by those linked with the Gadar movement. Singaravello Chettiar organized a Marxist group in Madras. Labour Kisan Gazette, a journal, was published from Madras. The journals Vanguard of India, 1922–24, and Masses of India, 1925–27, published abroad, were distributed illegally throughout the country, along with propaganda work. The young communists were very active in the TU and national movements. The TU movement was also getting more organized. Communists were active in the ATUC, formed in 1920. Link with the anti-imperialist movement. The CPI made serious efforts to link itself with the anti-imperialist struggle. It distributed manifestos outlining its views on the freedom struggle at the Congress sessions in 1921 and 1922 at Ahmedabad, Gaya respectively. These views included slogans of complete independence and radical economic and social reforms. The Congress was only demanding home rule at that time. Maulana Hazrat Mahani had moved the complete independence resolution at the 1921 Ahmedabad session of the Congress. It received 49 out of 100 votes. Communists kept raising this demand at Congress sessions. In 1928, over a lakh workers marched on the Congress session in Calcutta to demand adoption of the position full independence. Steady spread. The communist movement's steady spread caused serious anxiety to the British. Repressive measures were intensified. In 1924, the government unleashed a fresh attack, the Kanpur conspiracy case implicating communist leaders like Muzaffar Ahmed, Dange, Kakut Usmani etc. In spite of the repression, the Communists continued to conduct mass work and political propaganda among the masses. 1925, Kanpur Conference. Efforts to unite communist groups resulted in a conference at Kanpur in December 1925. It was convened by one Satyabhakta who wanted a purely national communist party. Singaravello Chettiar presided and S.V. Gate and J.P. Bagarhuda were elected secretaries. A central committee was also elected, though it cannot be said that it functioned as an effective all India leadership. There was an upsurge in the two movement and strike actions in 1924 to 1929. Communists were active in the national movement too. 1928 saw the heroic 6-month strike by 1.5 lakh textile workers in Bombay. Workers in major industries including railways organized solidarity actions. The railway workers' strike in Madras state was particularly noteworthy. The political demand for complete independence was vigorously put forward during these struggles. The All India Workers and Peasants Party was formed in 1928. Its formation in the states had started from 1926. This helped broaden the reach of the CPI and helped in facing British attempts to crush the communist movement in its infancy. Meerut Conspiracy Case, 1929–33. In 1929, just after the All India Workers and Peasants Party conference at Calcutta, the British government arrested 31 leading communists and left revolutionaries and launched the historic Meerut Conspiracy Case against them. The trial lasted for more than 4 years from 1929 to 1933 and attracted attention of anti-imperialists and progressives, especially the youth, throughout the country. The statement by the accused in court was a political declaration of faith of the CPI. The leaders were sentenced to various terms of imprisonment. The maximum was that of transportation for life for Com. Muzaffar Ahmed. The Meerut conspiracy case especially attracted attention of the militant youth towards the communist movement. Following the civil disobedience movement of 1930–34, the younger and radical elements in the national movement were feeling disgusted with the compromising, vacillating, and reformist practices of the dominant national leadership and began seeking more radical and revolutionary paths. Socialist ideas grew. Many young congressmen came into contact with communists in jail, were attracted towards Marxism-Leninism and in course of time became communists. One stream of radical congressmen, though they didn't become communists, organized the Congress Socialist Party. This party, while advocating radical policies, remained within the Congress. This party also contributed to the spread of socialist ideas among the Indian youth. 6th Congress of the Communist International and its impact. The Communist International played a key role in helping the Indian communist movement in its initial stages. The role of its major contingent, the Bolshevik Party, in providing inspiration, haven, and training to Indian revolutionaries, or that of the CPGB in helping the CPI, has already been noted. The International's open support to peoples fighting colonial rule and to the working class movement in capitalist countries helped enhance the communists' image, the world over. While appreciating this role, its limitations must also be understood. The 6th Congress of the CI, 1928, made a wrong assessment of role of the bourgeoisie in national liberation struggles. It opined that the bourgeoisie in colonial countries had gone over to imperialism. This meant undermining the contradiction between the bourgeoisie and imperialism. The companion to this was the social fascist thesis, which declared that social democrats were agents of fascism. This view seriously harmed the prospects of united front between the communists and the social democrats against the emergent danger of fascism, especially in Europe. A sectarian understanding was already present in different communists from 1926 onwards. This understanding was against any joint activities with the Reformist Congress. This in effect meant that these groups got cut off from the national movement. Individuals did participate in it, but their activities were mainly confined to trade unions. The 6th Congress of the CI strengthened this trend. Reflection of the above wrong and sectarian understanding of the 6th Congress of the Communist International was found in the CPI's draft program of action of 1930, which stated that, the capitalist class has long ago betrayed the struggle for independence of the country. It identified left elements in the Congress like Nehru and Subhash Bose as the biggest obstacle to the Indian Revolution and emphasized the need for ruthless war against left national reformist elements as an essential condition to isolate them from the masses. The draft program of action called for a united front against imperialism, landlords, money lenders, and capitalists and declared its objective to be achievement of Soviet power, i.e. socialism. This sectarian mistake did great harm to the party's image among the people. The communist-inspired split in the ATUC and the setting up of the Red Trade Union Congress in 1931 was one example of the impact of this sectarian line. ATUC was reunited with ATUC in 1934. The three parties' letter from the Communist parties of China, Great Britain, and Germany, published in Impricore, the organ of the CI in May 1932, attempted to correct this trend and argued for joint activities with the Congress to prevent isolation. The letter pointed to the absurdity of demanding that the Congress, which represented the bourgeoisie, should accept the CPI's slogan of Workers' and Peasants' Soviets. Instead, they advised joint action on partial demands of different sections coupled with some general demands. In 1933, the CPC wrote an open letter to the Indian Communists, dated July 16, 1933 and published by Impricore in November 1933, another letter advocating use of proper UF tactics to avoid isolation. However, these letters reflected the then understanding of the CI regarding the character of the bourgeoisie in colonial countries and therefore, in the ultimate analysis bolstered the sectarian trend. The scope for correction was also limited as most of the leaders were in jail at that time. Importance of the Draft Program of Action, 1933. Despite its sectarianism, the Draft Program of Action was a serious attempt to make a programmatic document. It was remarkable in that it explained independence to mean not just the end of British rule but also an end to economic and social slavery. It called for elimination of the caste system and caste slavery through agrarian revolution and pointed out that real independence meant liberation from imperialism and feudalism coupled with social emancipation. The second phase, 1934–45. Constitution of the Party Centre. After Meerut conspiracy case, many of the leaders who were acquitted and some who were functioning outside met in December 1933 and constituted a provisional CC. Following this, the party was reorganized and some progress was achieved in reviving the mass movement. This marked coming into being of a functioning party centre for the first time. All earlier efforts to constitute an All India centre for the party were unsuccessful. Party declared illegal. The British government, realising the potential danger, declared the CPI illegal in July 1934. Though the party was banned, party leaders and organisers vigorously carried on the work of extending the party's organisational network throughout the country. 7th Congress of the Communist International and United Front Tactics. While this regrouping and extending the spread of the party was gathering momentum, 7th Congress of the CI took place in 1935. It analyzed the experience of struggle against fascism in countries like Germany, Italy, France, etc., and discussed the urgent need for mobilizing all anti-war forces to defend peace. As for the colonial countries including India, the 7th Congress of the CI called for building broad-based anti-imperialist united fronts to face the challenges in the new situation. CPGB leaders, Rajni Palma Dutt and Ben Bradley, sent suggestions on UF tactics in Indian conditions to the CPI, Dutt-Bradley thesis. The CC, basing on this advice and its own experience, worked out concrete tactics of building a united anti-imperialist front. It decided that all communists should work within the Congress with the intent of making it a broad anti-imperialist organization. Further, the party decided to cooperate with the Congress Socialist Party. Following this tactical line, party cadres and leaders soon became influential leaders of the Congress and the CSP in many states. By such work, the Communists not only established and strengthened their contacts with radical elements but were also able to strengthen the anti-imperialist movement. This was also the period when the withdrawal of the civil disobedience movement further disillusioned and alienated the militant youth from the Congress. It is in this phase that the next generation of communist leadership, PS, Ms, AKG, Krishna Pillai, PR, Surjit etc. emerged. Rapid growth, 1936–39. In 1936–39 the party's mass work also expanded in a substantial way. Large number of TUS were organized and in many industries militant strikes took place. Its members along with left-wing Congress elements organized the AIKS in 1936. In the same year the AISF was formed as a broad militant fighting anti-imperialist organization of students. The party also worked to strengthen the movement of the people of the princely states, States People's Movement, for democracy. Though illegal, the party and its mass activities expanded in this period. The party published a central organ called the National Front besides a number of language papers. Communists played a significant role in the pre-war upswing in workers' and peasant movements. This led to growth of the Kisan Sabha. By its third conference in 1938, its membership reached 5.5 lakhs. Big struggles and demonstrations took place with the formation of Congress ministries in 1937. Often these ministries came into conflict with the interests of workers and peasants. Struggles had to be waged under communist leadership against such acts. In 1938, Kisan struggles took place in several provinces and Indiana. Many cases achieved significant successes against increased rent, evictions, forced labor, illegal exactions, and for reduction of rent. Congress was hostile to this independent movement of the peasantry as it challenged bourgeois monopoly of influence over peasants. They were especially alarmed that peasants were being taught to combine the fight for agrarian revolution with the fight for independence. By the time WW2 began, big peasant struggle were taking place in Bihar, Bengal, Punjab, Sindh, Andhra, Malabar, Surma Valley etc. Despite repression in the war period, the peasant movement grew and intensified. The pre-war upsurge in 1937–38 saw 379 strikes, the highest since 1921, involving 6.76 lakh workers. The 1936 Bengal Jute Strike, 1937 Kanpur Textile Strike, the Bombay Protest Strike vs the Dangerous Industrial Relations Bill, all these were led by ATUC, in which the Communists played an important role. This was the period of growth of the party in different states. Work organized under an All India Centre, unleashing of mass struggles at the initiative of the Communists and their frontline role in these struggles, as well as the coming to the party of the best elements from the CSP, contributed to this. The war years. This is a very important phase that sees the contradictory phenomena of increase in the strength of the party coupled with its political isolation. WW2 began in September 1939. In the initial stages, when the war fought between two imperialist groups, the party urged the Congress leadership to vigorously oppose the war and criticized their compromising and opportunist policies. The party organized and led innumerable struggles of workers against burdens imposed by war. The British launched a ferocious attack on the party, arresting and detaining thousands. The underground party faced the repression boldly. For more than 1 year the Congress did not give any call to oppose the war, and when it ultimately did in October 1940, it was a symbolic satyagraha for asserting the right to free speech. This was a parody of the anti-war struggle, though people chafing under restrictions and burdens imposed by the British courted arrest in their thousands. People's War. In June 1941, Nazi Germany attacked Soviet Union after having occupied most of Europe. In the east, Japanese, who invaded China in 1931, occupied entire SE Asia. In December 1941, they declared war on USA. In March 1942 their armies occupied Rangoon and were advancing on Chittagong. In North Africa, they advanced from Libya towards Egypt in 1941–42. Suez Canal seemed within their reach. They were stopped just 60 miles from Alexandria at El Alamein in October 1942. The danger of a global fascist victory was very real. The Britain, US and Soviet Union came together to meet this threat. Mortal danger faced Soviet Union, the first socialist state. A fascist victory would have destroyed Soviet Union and had very serious repercussions on the future of national liberation struggles. In this situation, the party assessed that the nature of war had changed and gave the slogan of People's War in December 1941. It called upon the British to form a national government to mobilize the people in the anti-fascist war. In July 1942, ban on the party was lifted, and after a long period it began to function legally, though many comrades continued to be in jails. The party's line in 1942. The Congress leadership decided to organize Quit India struggle in August 1942. The British responded with ferocious repression. A wave of anti-imperialist struggles spread all over the country. The CPI opposed this call as being detrimental to the anti-fascist struggle and adopted a line of downplaying mass movements on the plea that it would detract from war effort and help the fascists. It did not adopt more flexible tactics of organizing greater active opposition to the British even after the tide of the war turned after the momentous defeat of the Nazis in Battle of Stalingrad in February 1943. Large sections of Indian masses were unable to understand the rationale of People's War line, and its image suffered a definite setback among them. Despite this, even in this period the party maintained its strong links with the mass movements. In areas where it had a relatively better presence like Kerala, Bengal, Tripura, Andhra, and Tamil Nadu, the party forged strong links with the people by taking up struggles on mass issues like food, fuel, fight against oppression of feudal landlords, etc. In Bengal the CPI did stellar work during the Bengal famine, 1943, and earned the sympathy of the people. However, in other parts of the country where there was a big potential for the growth of the party, it got isolated from the mainstream of the national movement and the masses. Another understanding evolved in the CC. Plenum in September 1942 made a serious mistake regarding the nationality question by including religion as an important element in determining nationality. It described the slogan for Pakistan as reflecting democratic aspirations of newly awakened Muslim nationalities for self-determination. The same understanding also led the CPI to raise the slogan of Sikh Bhumi in 1945. This mistake was corrected in 1946. The steady work of the party among the masses yielded results. Its membership grew in this period as follows: 4,000 in July 1942, 15,000 in May 1943, 30,000 in January 1944 and 53,000 in 1946. The first party congress was held at Bombay from May 23 to June 1, 1943. The party membership then stood at 15,563. The third phase, 1945 to 55. Post-war upsurge and Indian independence. At the end of the war, with the defeat of fascism, a powerful upsurge was witnessed throughout the country. Solidarity actions for the release of INA prisoners. The Rhine Revolt of 1946 was significant to the British that the armed forces could no longer be relied upon. The naval ratings hoisted the flags of the Congress, Muslim League, and CPI and demanded a new government of independent India comprising all three forces. The Congress and Muslim League opposed the Rhine Revolt. Sardar Patel called for discipline in the Navy and Gandhi condemned the violence involved. The CPI and Bombay working class came out in support of the revolt. Over 250 people were killed in firing in 3 days. This period also saw the party in the forefront of the widespread peasants' struggles. Important among these was Tabhaga, the fight of the Bengal peasantry for two-third produce to the sharecroppers, Tabhaga. The most important of these struggles was the historic and revolutionary armed peasant partisan struggle in Telangana, which began in 1946. It liberated 3,000 villages from the rule of the Nizam and feudal landlords. Squads of communist guerrillas controlled over 16,000 square miles of territory. After independence, Nehru sent the Indian Army against the Telangana fighters. Over 4,000 communists were killed and the struggle had to be withdrawn. Other important struggles were those in Punnapur Vayalar and North Malabar in Kerala, struggle of the Warli tribals in Thane in Maharashtra, the fight of the Tripura tribals under the leadership of the Ganamati perished and its legendary leader, Co. Rathdeb, and innumerable working class and student struggles. Significant anti-feudal struggles in Bihar and eastern UP also took place in this period. The party was very active in leading the state people's struggles for democracy and against imperialist rule also. In this period, 1945 to 47, the party had to face the most ferocious repression with hundreds of martyrs laying down their lives. This mass upsurge hastened the process of compromise between the British imperialists and the Congress and Muslim League that resulted in partition of the country. Initial assessment of political independence. In August 1947, India won political independence. In 1945, after the end of WW2, discussions began in the party regarding the approach to independence. However, there were serious problems in making a correct assessment in this regard. Thus the April 1947 resolution of the CC opined that independence means that power is coming to the people, the British government is becoming a prisoner of the people and does not have any scope for maneuver. Simultaneously, it was also posited that we were going forward to a new era. The potentialities of the situation, new state, bourgeoisie, and the Congress Party were overestimated. This line was vociferously propagated by the then General Secretary, P.C. Joshi. The scope and meaning of the post-war mass upsurge was misread, and the possibility of its continuation after independence was taken for granted. This understanding ignored the fact that many people had rallied behind the Communist Party as it was the most resolute fighter against imperialism and not because they had become imbued with class consciousness. Independence was bound to create circumstances in which such sections would no longer rally behind the Communist Party in the same manner as they did in the 1945–47 period. There was a reaction against the overestimation of the new state and bourgeoisie in the rank and file of the party who had practical experience of the Congress. To correct this, the December 1947 CC resolution dubbed the earlier understanding as bourgeois reformist and highlighted only the negative aspects of the transfer of power and the anti-people aspects of the role of the Congress. This laid the basis for the left deviationist line of the Second Party Congress of 1948. Second Party Congress, Calcutta, 1948. The Second Party Congress declared Indian independence as formal, described Indian society as semi-colonial and semi-feudal, dubbed the bourgeoisie as collaborators with imperialism and called for the overthrow of the ruling class. The stage of revolution was described as that of national liberation or general united front against imperialism. This was based on a wrong understanding of the character of the bourgeoisie, denial of political independence through transfer of power to the bourgeoisie, the wrong belief that the pre-war revolutionary upsurge was continuing unabatedly and that conditions were ripe for revolution. The call for leading the revolutionary upsurge to People's Democratic Revolution was thus the main theme of the Second Party Congress held at Calcutta in March 1948. To seize power, emphasis was mainly on political general strike, i.e. the Russian model. The reality of Telangana, however, could not be ignored. Therefore the Second Congress also called for Telangana-type peasant partisan struggle all over the country. This left sectarian line of exaggerating revolutionary upsurge had disastrous consequences. The All India Railwaymen's Strike, 1949, flopped. The Telangana model did not find response in the peasantry elsewhere, and nor did the Indian people buy the slogan of Yet Azadi Yehudi Hai. Following the Second Party Congress, the government unleashed brutal repression on the party. Serious controversies and 1951 program. Differences arose in the party on the path of revolutionary advance, whether it should be the Russian or Chinese way. Andhra Comrades, Ref. Andhra letter, advocated the Telangana-type struggle as the main strategic path of the Indian Revolution. This underestimated the role of the working class. The other view, advocating political general strike as the main strategic plank, was also sectarian and underestimated the peasantry's role in a predominantly rural country. With inter-party conflicts becoming very acute, the party leadership sought the help of Stalin and CPSU to resolve differences. In December 1950, a four-man delegation of the CPI, comprising Dange, MB, Ajoy Ghosh and Rajwar Rao, met Stalin and worked out a draft program that was announced in April 1951. This was adopted along with the Statement of Policy, Perspective Tactical Line, outlining the path of the Indian Revolution, at the Special Party Conference held in underground conditions at Calcutta in December 1951 and was subsequently endorsed by the Third Party Congress in Madurai in 1953. The new party program corrected the wrong understanding on mechanically applying the Russian or Chinese path and on individual terrorism. But mistakes on the character of the state and the stage of revolution remained. Independence was still called formal. The stage remained the same as that before independence, i.e. national liberation, in which even the monopoly bourgeoisie had a role. The right to secession and self-determination were upheld, and the revolution was described as People's Democratic Revolution directed against British imperialist rule and feudal and semi-feudal landlordism. First general elections, 1952. Despite this wrong understanding, the party emerged as the major opposition party in Parliament in the first general elections in 1952. This was because in the areas where it led the anti-feudal struggle and mass movements, the party had struck deep roots among the people, who reposed their confidence in the party. Inter-party conflicts surface. Despite adoption of the program and the statement of policy, serious theoretical, ideological and political problems arose, after the Madurai Party Congress in 1953. The differences aggravated as practice was showing several of the program's formulations, especially those regarding characterization of India's independence, foreign policy, economic policy, and tactics, to be wrong. The 1951 program was virtually put in cold storage after the Third Congress, and work began to be guided on the basis of the political resolutions adopted by the Party Congress. This was to continue till 1964, when after the split two programs, revolutionary and revisionist, were adopted by the CPI, M, and CPI respectively. Objective conditions and policies of the Congress government led to revisionist illusions. The Congress government opted for planning, public sector, gave the slogan of land reforms, and talked about the socialist pattern of society. The emergence of the party as the second largest in Parliament also contributed to an extent. One section of the party began arguing that the bourgeoisie had split into two: monopoly, collaborating with imperialism, and feudalism and non-monopoly, consistently opposed to both imperialism and feudalism. Positions of the CPSU and CPC helped increase these illusions. In 1955, Khrushchev and Bulganin visited India and declared Nehru to be a progressive. The CPC did the same in 1956. The fourth phase, 1955 to 1964. Fourth Party Congress, Palghat, 1956. Three trends emerged at Fourth Party Congress, April 1956. A. The revisionist trend, advocating collaboration with Congress on the plea that the government was following progressive policies. B. The revolutionary trend represented by PS, MB, Surjit plus 2 CCM stressing fight vs bourgeois landlord government, and C. The official trend that tried accommodating both opposing trends. The line of outright class collaboration was defeated, but it got support of 30% of delegates. At the time of adopting the PAL resolution, Ajoy Ghosh said that though government was bourgeois landlord, led by big bourgeoisie, there was no need to mention the latter aspect as it was understood. This concession later came handy for revisionists. The Congress was held immediately after CPSU's 20th Congress that had given fillip to revisionism. In spite of these differences, the party during 1953–56 led or was active in various struggles such as that for linguistic reorganization of states, and pioneered these movements Kerala, Andhra, Tamil Nadu, and Maharashtra. It led huge peasant struggles in many states for land reforms, tenancy rights, land ceiling, reduction of rents and redistribution of land. It took lead in fighting against policies of the government, though one section was lukewarm towards these struggles. After the Fourth Congress, besides impact of the 20th Congress of the CPSU, other factors also helped in the growth of revisionism. The formation Swatantra Party, with an outright reactionary program, led to a demand from a section that the party should join hands with the Congress to fight such reactionary forces. Victory of CPI in Kerala Assembly in 1957 and its advance in some states strengthened the party's image. Formation of Kerala Ministry enthused the working class, peasants, and the general democratic movement. It signified emergence of CPI as an important element within alternatives to the Congress. But, it also helped fuel illusions, and some began arguing for parliamentary road to socialism. Fifth Party Congress, Amritsar, 1958. The Fifth Party Congress was a special party congress convened in the background of electoral victory in Kerala Assembly elections and growing influence of revisionist ideas in the aftermath of CPSU's 20th Congress. By this time, political differences in the party had crystallized into two main trends, revisionist and revolutionary. Attempts were made to project the peaceful parliamentary path in alliance with Congress in the name of fighting right reaction. Due to strong opposition to this, the PAL resolution called for fighting both Congress and right reaction. Organizational changes, providing for three-tier organization, were also made at Amritsar. After the Amritsar Congress, difference of opinion in the party got accentuated on almost all issues. Differences in the international communist movement were also reflected in this. In spite of the Congress Party's hostility towards the Kerala government, the revisionists continued to harp on the theme of Congress communist unity. The attitude of the revisionist section of the leadership to struggles was exposed by its betrayal of the anti-betterment levy movement in Punjab in 1959. This revisionists came to an agreement with Nehru behind the backs of the Punjab State Committee of the party that was bravely leading this struggle. India-China conflict. In 1959, the India-China border dispute came to the fore. This was a signal to whip up an anti-communist hysteria in order to attack and weaken the revolutionary trend. Comrades fighting against revisionism stood against national chauvinism and called for peaceful settlement of the border dispute. The revisionists followed the path of collaboration with the ruling party and fell prey to national chauvinism. Sixth Party Congress, Vijayawada, 1961. The inter-party conflict was acutely reflected at the 6th Congress at Vijayawada in 1961. There were two separate programs and political resolutions. In an effort to avert a split, certain compromises were made in the political line and the organizational setup. Dange was elected to the newly created post of chairman and Ems was made general secretary. Inter-party struggle intensifies. The period after the 6th Party Congress saw intense conflict within the party. The government used the border issue to brand a section of the party as anti-national. One section of the party also carried out this campaign and took obstructionist positions on fighting government policies. Following the outbreak of Indo-Chinese hostilities in October 1962, the government arrested hundreds of comrades, dubbing them as anti-nationals. Lists of those who stood opposed to the line of national chauvinism were prepared by Dange and other revisionists and given to the police. For the first time, the CPI refused to even issue a statement protesting the arrest of a section of its leadership under DIR. Following their release in 1963, there were serious efforts to resolve the inter-party conflicts. But the revisionists resorted to intrigues to capture the party organization. All efforts to conduct meaningful inter-party discussion and to avert a split were sabotaged by them. The inter-party struggle culminated in a walkout by 32 National Council members in April 1964, when all avenues for serious discussion on political organizational issues were closed. After this, serious efforts were again made for unity. But the revisionists stubbornly opposed these moves. The split had become inevitable. Formation of the CPI-M. The 32 comrades who had walked out, convened an All-India Convention at Tenali in July 1964, that laid the basis for holding of the 7th Party Congress at Calcutta in November 1964. The 7th Congress adopted the party program, constitution, political report on fight against revisionism and a political resolution on immediate tasks. The 7th Congress declared that it represented the CPI. It marked a new stage in the advance of the communist movement in India. New wave of repression. The ruling classes understood the potential danger arising out of the formation of the CPI-M, and straightaway launched repressive attacks on the party. Even on the eve of the 7th Congress, many party leaders from West Bengal had been arrested and imprisoned. Within 2 months of the 7th Congress, the government arrested more than 1,500 central, state, and district leaders of the party. They were in jail for 1.5 years till the mid-1966. Simultaneously, a white paper was issued slandering the party as pro-Chinese, anti-national, conspiratorial outfit preparing for armed insurrection was unleashed. The CPI and other revisionist parties, especially CPSU, carried out a vigorous anti-CPI-M campaign, calling it a party of splitters and adventurists. For some time it appeared as if the CPI-M was isolated internationally and nationally. 1965 Kerala elections. Despite intense repression, the party extended its influence over the masses. In the midterm elections to the Kerala Assembly, the CPI-M won 45 seats while the CPI got only 3 seats. This proved the deep roots of the party among the people and confirmed its pursuit of correct policies reflecting urges of the people. The party continued to publish party organs in 7 languages including PD. During the India-China conflict and the India-Pakistan War in 1965, party leaders were subjected to continuous persecution. The party grew despite this. After release of party leaders in 1966, tasks on party organization, Trade Union Front and Kisan Front documents were adopted that helped expand the party's activities. Between 1965 and 1967, big mass struggles and general strikes were conducted in many parts of the country, including the anti-price rise struggle in West Bengal. The party's mass organizations were also strengthened. 1967 general elections and the new situation. Following elections to the parliament and state assemblies in 1967, a new political situation emerged in the country. The Congress lost its mandate in 9 states, losing to different parties. In West Bengal and Kerala, CPI-M emerged as the leading party in the assemblies and UF governments came into power at the state level. In Tripura too, CPI-M emerged as a strong force. These developments marked entry of the party as an important player in Indian politics. In Parliament also, the party emerged a main opposition group. This was also a befitting reply to the revisionists who claimed to be the real Communist Party. Issues involved vis-a-vis the right revisionists. 1. Ideological. A. On contradictions. Marxism-Leninism recognizes 4 basic contradictions of this epoch. A. Between socialism and imperialism. B. Between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie in capitalist countries. C. Between imperialism and the oppressed countries/national liberation, and D. Between different imperialist states and monopoly capitalist groups. 2. The contradiction between socialism and imperialism is the central contradiction. This contradiction came into being with the creation of a socialist system in 1917. It is the central contradiction because only its resolution can end other contradictions of the epoch. This holds true even after the reverses faced by socialism in the last decade of the 20th century. As Para 2.8 of our party program puts it, despite the fact that the international correlation of forces favors imperialism at the end of the 20th century and capitalism continues to develop production forces, it remains a crisis-ridden system apart from being a system of oppression, exploitation, and injustice. The only system, which is an alternative to capitalism, is socialism. The central contradiction therefore remains that between imperialism and socialism for the epoch. 3. Other social contradictions can accentuate and become focal at a specific point of time. For example, in the late 1960s the contradiction between national liberation and imperialism became focal. This was the period when the wars of national liberation in Vietnam, Laos, Kampuchea, etc. were at their height. In the early 1980s the central contradiction itself became focal with heightened threats to Soviet Union and world peace resulting from aggressive nuclear moves of Reagan administration. But, no other contradiction however aggravated can replace the contradiction between socialism and imperialism as the central one, though accentuation of any non-central contradiction does impact on the central contradiction. 4. The revisionists recognized the existence of the 4 fundamental contradiction but refused to accept possibility of any of the non-central contradictions accentuating and becoming focal. They also refused to see that accentuation of any of the non-principal contradictions impacts on the central contradiction as well. The heightening of contraction between national liberation and imperialism, exemplified by the war and victory in Vietnam, objectively weakened imperialism and strengthened socialism in relative terms vis-a-vis imperialism. The wrong understanding of the revisionists resulted in their underestimating the role of national liberation struggles. Thus the Soviet Union and CPSU, from where this wrong understanding of the CPI emanated, while helping the liberation struggle in Vietnam, did not give it all the support it was possible for them to give. B. Peaceful coexistence, competition and transition. I. Following the CPSU, the revisionists upheld wrong and extremely harmful views on other ideological issues as well. This is exemplified by the notorious 3 PSIE slogans of peaceful coexistence, peaceful competition and peaceful transition, which the ideological resolution of the Burdwan Plenum in 1967 aptly described as the trio that works out into a full-fledged line of class collaboration. 2. Lenin's tactical slogan of peaceful coexistence with imperialism, given at a time when the infant Soviet state, after having successfully faced large-scale foreign armed intervention and civil war, needed breathing space to gather strength, was turned into a strategic slogan by the revisionists. This wishes away the inherently aggressive character of imperialism and creates illusions that imperialism can peacefully coexist with socialism. The degree to which the character, nature, and strength of imperialism was underestimated by the revisionists is well illustrated by Khrushchev's claim that imperialism was like a button on a coat that could be torn out and thrown away at time. The above understanding had grave implications for the struggle against imperialism. Apart from its immediate effects on tactics, it also ideologically disarmed the people of a large number socialist states and members and followers of numerous communist parties that followed the line from Moscow. 3. The 20th Party Congress of the CPSU also argued that socialism would triumph through peaceful economic competition with imperialism. According to the revisionists, the force of example would automatically lead people to see the superiority of socialism over capitalism and inspire them to opt for it. This view, which totally undermines the role of ideology, politics, and organization, i.e. the subjective factor, was propagated by the Indian revisionists as well. 4. The third pillar of this was the concept of peaceful transition, i.e. the parliamentary path to power propagated by the CPSU and lapped up by our revisionists. The disastrous implications and experience of this understanding is borne out by the experience of communist parties, which tried to implement it. 2. Assessment of the character of the Indian state. A. The revisionists call the Indian state the state of the bourgeois as a whole and talk of considerable influence of monopoly sections. They also speak of compromise between the bourgeoisie and landlords at the provincial level. But they refuse to accept that the leadership of the ruling classes is with the big bourgeoisie. Similarly, they refuse to recognize the fact of inclusion of landlords in the ruling alliance. B. The denial that the big bourgeoisie leads the Indian state compromises the proletarian stand towards the bourgeois state and covers up the direction of state policies which bolster monopoly. The 500 times growth of the assets of the top 22 monopoly houses from Rs. 312.63 crores in 1957 to Rs. 1,58,004.72 crores in 1997, as pointed out in Para 3.12 of the CPI, M.'s program, stands testimony to the real direction of state policies. By denying that monopoly leads the Indian state, the revisionists conceal from the people their leading class enemy. C. Similarly, to say that landlords are not in state power and only exert some influence at the state's level hides the criminal gang up of the bourgeoisie with landlordism, which heaps untold misery on the Indian people and which is an obstacle even to the development of capitalism. The fact that land monopoly remains intact and 3% of the rural population owns up to 30% of the land, while 40% of the rural population is landless and another 30% composed of small and marginal peasants, clearly points to landlords being partners in state power. D. On the basis of an objective assessment of the economy, society, and state policies since independence, the program of the CPI, M, in Para 5.1 describes the Indian state as the organ of the class rule of the bourgeoisie and landlords led by the big bourgeoisie. 3. On the nature of the Indian bourgeoisie. A. The revisionists dub the Indian bourgeoisie as being consistently anti-imperialist. This is hiding the dual role of compromise and opposition by the bourgeoisie vis-à-vis imperialism. They see the foreign policy of non-alignment as being the result of anti-imperialism of the bourgeoisie. This is untrue, as such a foreign policy arises out of the class interests of the bourgeoisie. B. How will CPI explain today's greater and greater succumbing of the bourgeoisie to imperialist pressure if it is consistently anti-imperialist? By making such formulations, revisionists create illusions that there is no need for the people to be vigilant, the government will take care of their interests vis-à-vis imperialism. Para 5.1 of CPI-M's program states that the big bourgeoisie are increasingly collaborating with foreign finance capital in pursuit of the capitalist path of development. This formulation was included in the program adopted by the 7th Congress of the party in 1964 itself. The collaborationist trend of the big bourgeoisie vis-à-vis imperialism and its tendency to increase with the passage of time is rooted in a. The relatively weak position of the Indian bourgeoisie as compared to the imperialist bourgeoisie, b. The limitations imposed by its compromise with landlordism, c. Its dependence for advanced technology on imperialist countries, d. The lack of colonies that helped capital accumulation for those capitalist countries where capitalism first came into being, and e. The late start in building capitalism. The demise of socialism in the Soviet Union and the consequent strengthening of imperialism has also aided the trend towards increasing collaboration. That, however, does not render the bourgeoisie compradori. As the party program points out in Para 3.4, after independence the dual character of the bourgeoisie manifested itself through conflicts and collusion with imperialism. Para 7.10 of the program describes this dual character as follows: the Indian bourgeoisie as a class has its conflicts and contradictions with imperialism and also with the feudal and semi-feudal agrarian order. But the bigger and monopoly section, after attainment of independence, seeks to utilize its hold over the state power to resolve these conflicts and contradictions by compromise, pressure, and bargain. C. The revisionists also call the bourgeoisie consistently anti-feudal and refer to some compromises only at the state's level. The implication is that if you put pressure on them, then their essential anti-feudal and anti-landlord role can be maintained. This virtually amounts to saying that the agrarian tasks of the democratic revolution can be and have been completed by the bourgeoisie via land reform, and that landlordism is not one of the key enemies in the revolutionary strategy at this stage. This not only flies in the face of historical experience of the approach of the bourgeoisie towards landlordism, especially after 1917, it also wishes away persistence of land monopoly and hides from the people their key enemy in democratic revolution. The CPI-M program describes abolition of landlordism as the foremost task and axis of people's democratic revolution. 4. On the stage of revolution. A. The revisionists call their stage of revolution National Democratic Revolution. Intrinsic to this is their formulation about the non-capitalist path. According to them, with socialist aid and building of the public sector, dubbed as socialist sector, the working class in alliance with the national bourgeoisie can move to the national democracy and socialism bypassing capitalism. Such a dispensation, according to them, means sharing of power with the national bourgeoisie. Lenin had talked of the possibility of non-capitalist path in extremely backward countries, where the bourgeoisie is not developed. He had envisaged that in such a situation different petty bourgeois elements with the help of socialist countries could take their nation to socialism via this path. Lenin had the predominantly tribal Mongolia in mind. There is no question of applying this thesis to India with its developed bourgeoisie led by monopoly sections. Doing so can only lead to class collaboration, as is clear from the revisionist prescriptions of sharing power with the national bourgeoisie. B. The CPI-M's position with regard to socialist aid has always been that this is not a means to build socialism. Rather, it is a means to build and sustain state capitalism, which constituted the major plank in the strategy for development of capitalism by the Indian bourgeoisie after attainment of political independence. Similarly, the CPI-M has never viewed the public sector as being an island of socialism in a sea of capitalism, as the revisionists claim. The public sector is state capitalism that provides infrastructure for the development of capitalism in India. The CPI-M has supported the public sector on account of its role in building an independent technological and industrial base, and in that measure warding off imperialist pressures. 5 On tasks of democratic revolution. A. According to revisionists, the main tasks of revolution are anti-imperialist and anti-feudal. However, seen in the light of their formulations that the state is the state of the national bourgeoisie as a whole, which is both anti-imperialist and anti-feudal in nature, the real scope of these tasks get defined to mean not the overthrow of the state, but as being directed against those elements in the ruling class which have links with imperialism and feudalism, and the formation of a government of genuine anti-imperialist and anti-feudal elements. B. The revisionists recognize the existence of the monopoly bourgeoisie but deny its leadership of the ruling class alliance. Hence their task vis-a-vis monopoly is that of breaking up monopoly combines. Nowhere is it stated that they will take over monopoly capital and bring it under public ownership. Instead, they will break it up and let it exist as non-monopoly capital. C. They undermine the fight against both imperialism and landlordism by attributing to the national bourgeoisie a consistent anti-imperialist and anti-landlord role, while hiding the collaborative aspects of their relationships with both. By refusing to recognize monopoly as one of the primary targets of democratic revolution, they undermine the democratic revolution itself. Without decisively smashing monopoly, the anti-feudal and anti-imperialist task cannot be fulfilled, as the monopoly has leadership over the ruling alliance. 6 On class alliance for democratic revolution. A. The revisionists state that their National Democratic Front will comprise the working class, peasantry, middle classes, and some sections of national bourgeoisie. Most of this looks like the CPI-M program. But the differences between the National Democratic and People's Democratic Fronts are basic. The first basic difference is that NDF does not posit leadership of the working class. Instead, it advocates joint leadership of the bourgeoisie and working class. This follows from the fact that the NDF is not aimed at dislodging the bourgeoisie landlord state and government. Its limited objective is to cleanse the ruling alliance of some reactionary elements. This joint leadership in the NDF implies leadership of the bourgeoisie and betrayal of the working class and peasantry. 2. The second basic difference concerns the role of the peasantry in revolution. The revisionists don't differentiate between role of different strata of the peasantry in the democratic revolution. Thus, agricultural workers and small peasants, main pillars of democratic revolution in the countryside, have no special significance for them and are clubbed along with rich peasants. The revisionist position will allow the rich peasantry to seize the leadership in the countryside, which will lead to betrayal of the agrarian revolution, the axis of the democratic revolution. 4. Just as the working class has not been attributed the leadership of the Democratic Front, similarly agricultural workers and small peasants are denied leadership in the countryside. It means in reality that for the revisionists, worker-peasant unity does not form the basis of the NDF. B. By placing the responsibility for compromising with imperialism and landlordism solely on the monopolists, the revisionists create illusions that non-monopoly sections are consistently anti-imperialist. This ignores the dual character of the bourgeoisie vis-a-vis both imperialism and feudalism, and cannot but undermine the anti-imperialist and anti-feudal content of their NDR, especially given the joint leadership with the bourgeoisie. 7 On ways of transition. Following the CPSU thesis of peaceful transition, the revisionists advocate the parliamentary road to power. The communist parties of Iraq, Egypt, Sudan, and Iran were wiped out while trying to implement this line. The worst examples of the results of this understanding can be seen in Indonesia and Chile. 8 Revisionist tactics deriving out of strategy. 0 In the 1965 Kerala elections, the people rejected the line of the revisionists. CPI won 3 seats while CPI with many of its candidates behind bars, got 45 seats. In 1967 CPI joined the Bihar, UP and Punjab ministries along with the Jan San. Indradeep Sinha was Land Revenue Minister in the Bihar government when over a score agricultural workers were killed by the police. He continued to be minister. Rajshwar Rao advocated a similar alliance at the centre. THECPI developed a full-fledged political alliance with the Congress after the Congress split in 1969. In Kerala, Achyuta Menon headed a ministry where the Congress had a majority for over a decade. THECPI and ATUK betrayed the All India Railway strike in 1974. THECPI supported the emergency. They were party to suppression of democratic and T.U. rights, imprisonment of thousands of activists of the opposition parties and wage and freeze imposed on the working class. They had been in political alliance with the Congress in West Bengal right through the entire phase of semi-fascist terror from 1971 to 1977, in which 1,200 activists of the CPI-M were killed, over 25,000 had to flee their homes, and hundreds of party and mass organization offices were burnt down. Speaking in the Lok Sabha on July 21, 1975, Commander A.K. Gopalan lambasted the CPI's support to emergency in the following words: "The CPI, the wretched traitors to the working class and toiling people, continues to function as Her Majesty's loyal opposition." THECPI-M tried its best to maintain the unity of class and mass organizations. But this became impossible, as unity is for struggle and not class collaboration. Given the CPI's class collaborationist line, we had to set up a separate AIKS in 1967 and break with ATUK and AISF to form CITU and SFI in 1970. THE impact of revisionism undermined democratic centralism in the CPI. GIVE and the ideological deviations and erosion of consciousness with which the CPI was beset, it is not surprising that it took vacillating and wishy-washy positions at crucial movements where partisanship in defense of socialism were involved, for e.g. Czechoslovakia 1967 and the Tiananmen Square. Revisionists have done immense harm to the communist movement, especially in North India. Right revisionism, as Lenin said, undermines the revolutionary core of Marxism-Leninism and is in the ultimate analysis a vehicle of bourgeois influence within the working class movement. Basically, CPI is a left social democratic party. THE post-1977 tactics of CPI do not follow from their strategy but from their survival instincts. In fact, the CPI has no program since the last 10 years. Marxism-Leninism is both revolutionary and scientific. Ignoring either aspect leads to deviations. Right revisionism undermines the revolutionary content of Marxism-Leninism and represents the influence of the bourgeoisie within the working class movement. As we shall see later, left adventurism undermines the scientific spirit and content of Marxism-Leninism and represents the influence of the petit bourgeoisie within the working class movement. Left adventurist deviation. The advance of the party after the split in 1964 and its success in the arena of mass struggles and elections was carried out in the face of severe repression by the Government of India and the all-out opposition of the revisionists. But soon the party was faced with the serious problem arising out of left sectarian adventurist trend in the party and outside. Background. The Seventh Party Congress had deferred discussion on ideological questions. Immediately after it, most of the top leadership of the party was imprisoned and the task of debating and clinching these issues could not be carried forward. At the same time, the CPC, which had initially taken correct positions vis-a-vis the revisionism of the CPSU, moved to a left sectarian position and began characterizing the India as a neo-colony and the Indian government a client of imperialism, etc. The prestige of the CPC helped in this disruption that had to be fought. This left sectarian attack on the party came in the form of advocacy of and even launching of adventurist sectarian armed actions. This trend later came to be known as Naxalism. An important aspect of Naxalism was that it swore total allegiance to the left sectarian line then dominant in the Communist Party of China. The Chinese party on their part encouraged this group in all forms. Left sectarianism had been present in the undivided CPI as well, especially in 1948–51. This had reflected in characterizing independence as formal, dubbing the Indian ruling class as the stooge of British imperialism, advocacy of the Chinese path to revolution, etc. Burdwan Plenum, 1967. As a result of this trend, the CPI-M was faced with a difficult situation for some time. It was in this background that the party organized a special plenum at Burdwan to discuss the party's stand on the ideological controversies in the world communist movement, which had become very acute with the CPSU following a revisionist line and the CPC leadership adopting a left sectarian line. The Burdwan plenum dealt and rejected the left sectarian adventurist line of the Naxalites, besides reaffirming rejection of right revisionism. With regard to the international questions, the plenum confirmed the basic understanding that the CPI-M will take an independent position with regard to controversies in the world communist movement, while standing firm in upholding proletarian internationalism and loyalty to the revolutionary principles of Marxism-Leninism. The left sectarians broke away from the party after the Burdwan plenum. This trend had its followers in some strength in certain state units of the party. As a result, the party's base was affected in these states. During the course of the last 35 years, this Naxalite trend has been proved politically bankrupt, and this movement has fragmented and splintered into innumerable little groups. Main left sectarian/Naxalite formulations. A. India is not politically independent, it is a semi-colony. B. The state is semi-colonial and semi-feudal and is controlled by the imperialists. C. Accordingly, the stage of revolution is that of national liberation against imperialism, comprador capitalism, and feudalism. D. The class alliance for revolution includes all non-comprador sections of the bourgeoisie, including the monopoly bourgeoisie, besides the entire peasantry, middle class, working class, etc. E. The struggle for national liberation is a people's war based on armed struggle of the peasantry in the main. F. At the international level, the Soviet Union was first called revisionist and collaborating with U.S. imperialism. Later it was dubbed as social imperialist and the greatest enemy of the people. G. All those who upheld the existence of the socialist camp were called agents of social imperialism. Such abuse was specially directed at the CPI-M. H. On the nationality question, the Naxalites upheld the right to self-determination, including the right to secession as an absolute right. I. At the level of tactics, the adventurists advocated no participation in elections, armed struggle based on individual annihilation, disdain for the organized trade union and other mass movements, etc. Implications of the left deviationist understanding. A. This understanding wished away existence of the socialist camp by equating socialism with imperialism. It even went beyond this and called the major socialist force the main enemy of the Indian people, thus objectively helping imperialism. B. The formulation regarding the Indian bourgeoisie being comprador has nothing to do with the Marxist-Leninist understanding of what really comprises the comprador bourgeoisie. The theses on the revolutionary movement in colonial and semi-colonial countries of the 6th Congress of the Communist International held in 1928 had stated that the comprador bourgeoisie in a colonial, dependent or a backward country is a servitor of foreign imperialism concerned mainly with trade operations connected with the export of indigenous raw materials and import of manufactured goods from imperialist countries. Mao Zedong in his work Chinese Revolution and the Chinese Communist Party, accepted this definition of the comprador bourgeoisie made by the Communist International. In other words, comprador bourgeoisie essentially means those sections that act as commission agents with no interests other than selling and buying goods for the imperialists. Industrial capital, which is preponderant in India, has its own material base and interests arising thereof and hence cannot be comprador. To justify its erroneous position, classical Naxalism resorted to a refusal to see the existence of a large industrial bourgeoisie with a developed monopoly section and the latter's leadership of the state power. This not only flew in the face of facts, it also hid from the people one of their leading enemies. C. The denial of political independence leads to holding on the same pre-1947 stage of revolution. D. This understanding gives primacy to the peasantry as the leading revolutionary force, sees the role of the working class in revolution as secondary. This amounts to ignoring the existence of a fairly large working class and its role and leadership in revolution. This is a kind of Narodnism. The mechanical advocacy of the Chinese path of revolution derives from this wrong understanding. The view that the right of self-determination, inclusive of the right of secession, is as an absolute right, does violence to the Marxist-Leninist understanding of the issue. Both Marx and Lenin, while talking of self-determination, qualified it by the overarching criterion of whether it served the interests of the working class or not. Support to secession as an absolute right can only play into the hands of imperialism today, as can be understood in the context of Kashmir and Northeast. There is a gross overestimation of the objective situation vividly captured in the slogan that a single spark will light the prairie fire. The dependence on individual annihilation shows petit bourgeois contempt towards developing the revolutionary mass movement and looking for shortcuts to revolutionary change, so characteristic of petit bourgeois radicalism the world over. In West Bengal, in the early 1970s, the Naxals unleashed murderous attacks against the CPI-M, often along with Congress goons, and earned the ignominy of being called Kongshals. Their similar role in Andhra Pradesh was recorded in detail by Commander P. Sundaraya. The CPI, Maoist, that most vividly represents this criminal anarchist trend, is unleashing murderous attacks on CPI-M, cadre in West Bengal today, in alliance with the Trinamool Congress. In Bihar, AP, and some other areas, this variety of Naxalism has degenerated into extortion, dacoity and killing of low-level forest and land revenue officials. The attitude of the state to this form of Naxalism is one of willful tolerance, with the calculation of utilizing them against the organized left movement. When things get really bad and even ruling party legislators are killed, as in Andhra Pradesh, measures like banning these outfits or the intent to take firm action against them are announced, only to be conveniently forgotten very soon. It's noteworthy that the same Indian state under Nehru's stewardship unleashed its army against the Communist Party-led Telangana peasant partisan armed struggle in the years immediately following independence. Obviously, the Indian state perceived this historic struggle as a real threat. The Naxalite movement split into innumerable groups. Of them, the most prominent today is the CPI-ML, Liberation.